Okay, I'm calling this special meeting of council to order. First, I'd like to acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on a traditional territory that's now as First Nation. First item on the agenda is adoption of the agenda. I'll just make the motion that the November 24th, 2021 special council meeting agenda be adopted as presented. Do I have a second? Or second by Councillor Savage? Yeah, I got it. Any discussion on the agenda?
Point of order.
Point of order. It's being called. Yes, go ahead, Councillor Gaspard.
Thank you. I note Councillor Wilson isn't here.
He's up on the screen.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so any discussion on the agenda? And just also, we did receive some additional information on green sheet for listed under item 4A of our agenda. So it would be adoption of the agenda with additional information received for item 4A. Okay. I'm going to move to call in question. All those in favor? Opposed? Okay, that's carried unanimously. That moves us on to public input period. Staff has informed me there's nobody registered. Is that still the fact? Okay, great. Thank you. And moving on to 4A of our agenda. So this is the 2022 to 2026 5-year financial plan. So we have a PowerPoint presentation. So Director Hare, I'm assuming you're going to be doing a presentation for council.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I will be. I'm just going to share my screen.
Okay.
Are you seeing my presentation on the screen there?
Yes, we are.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. So Your Worship, through to you to council and the public, this PowerPoint presentation is intended to recap the information that's been provided to council at the October 13th and October 27th special council meetings on the 2022 to 2026 financial plan. So it's a combined public consultation and budget presentation to council. Detailed financial information on the operating and capital budgets and reserve schedules were provided to council and presented at the October 27th budget meeting. So in terms of this PowerPoint presentation, I'm going to review the budget highlights of the general fund and operating budget, the impact of changes required to water and sewer user fees for 2022, recap the annual fee for garbage collection and recycling. I have some information to share with the public on the impact to the average assessed property of the additional property tax required in 2022. I have capital plan information for the next 5 years, and then I'll recap the next steps in the budget process. So in terms of the general fund in 2021, 312,200 of contributions to asset reserves were funded using COVID restart grant funds. This provided temporary relief from an increase in property taxes in 2021 and deferred the property tax increase impact to 2022. In order to keep the required contribution to reserves at the same level as 2021, an increase of 312,200 is required in property tax revenue. This will still leave an infrastructure funding deficit of $424,000 per year, which will need to be addressed in future years. Also, at the October 27th council meeting, council also passed a resolution for the 2022 budget to include an additional $5,000 contribution to a reserve intended for expansion of the community water system. This provision has been incorporated into the financial plan bylaw, which is going to be considered by council this evening. In terms of the operating budget, the 2020 operating budget is focused on maintaining existing levels of service. So the following additional provisions are included in the 2022 budget, which will require a $218,900 in additional property tax revenue. So there's 2 new positions in the budget. One is in planning, to be able to continue to meet community and council expected service levels and address current and long-range planning and assisting with building inspection, bylaws compliance services, economic development, and parks and trails planning. And the second one is in public works to address adequate maintenance of existing and new infrastructure taken on by the municipality. There's also a provision for compensation to volunteer firefighters, which is going to be changed to reflect a 2-hour minimum call out. Currently, volunteer compensation is rounded to the nearest half hour, which has resulted in situations where volunteer firefighters have been called out and received as little as $7.50 compensation for the call out. There's also a budget provision for the fire chief's provision to be increased, budget provision to be increased from 3 days per week to 4 days per week. The financial plan also calls for compensation adjustments for QP staff as per the collective agreement, and for exempt staff and council based on the consumer price index. And there's also an adjustment to the mayor's remuneration, which was a result of a council resolution at the last council meeting. The budget also includes basically a provision for one-time operating projects or initiatives that are necessary on an ongoing basis. There's currently no provision in Lantzville's operating budget for one-time operating projects. An annual funding provision for one-time operating projects is included in the 2022 budget. So in the past, I believe these projects were identified as special projects in the budget, and the tax levy would fluctuate to accommodate them. In the 2021 operating budget, there are also several expenditure provisions which were funded using COVID Restart grant funds. So this provided temporary relief from property tax in 2021, and the property tax impact was deferred to 2022. There is no increase in expenditure provisions for these in 2022, as the provision was approved in 2021. However, the tax revenue impact is occurring in 2022. And then there are also anticipated cost increases due to inflation that are taken into consideration. In terms of utilities, on the sewer utility, there's no increase expected in user fees for 2022. There is additional revenue from newly connected properties, which does exceed the anticipated increase in expenditures, and it's allowed for an increase in the contribution to the reserve to sewer. So the quarterly base charge for sewer will remain at the 2021 level of $128 per quarter. In the water utility, there's a 10% increase required in water rates, and it's primarily driven by the anticipated increase in bulk water purchases from Nanaimo, and also due to a contribution to a reserve to allow for expanding the local water system, which was again requested and approved at the last council meeting, and that's been incorporated into the financial plan. So the quarterly base charge will increase from $73 for 2021 to $80 a quarter for 2022. In terms of garbage collection fees, garbage recycling and food waste services are carried out through a contract with a regional district. Based on current information that we have from the RDN, no increase in rates is anticipated for 2022. And the typical annual charge for a 100-liter cart is $160 per year, or rather $160 per year. It's billed quarterly at $40 per quarter. And then in terms of what this means to the average house in Lantzville, the impact to a residential property at the average assessed value of $1,005,600 would be a $303 increase per year. Now, in previous presentations, this slide illustrated the impact to an average assessed property at $754,000, which was based on 2021 BC assessment roll data. The 2022 preview roll was released by BC Assessment earlier this month, and the residential property value assessments for Lantzville increased by an average of 30%. So the impact, however, the impact to the average home remains consistent with what was illustrated in the previous special meetings. So the municipal property tax revenue will still increase by $274 per year, or $23 per month for the average home assessed at just over $1 million now. The base user fee for water will increase by $29 per year, or $2 per month. So just to reiterate a point that's been made at previous budget meetings, an increase in assessed value does not result in the municipality collecting more tax revenue. The mill rate is adjusted to offset the change in assessment. So the mill rate for 2022 is anticipated to be about $1.59 per $1,000 of assessed value in comparison to $1.71 per $1,000 assessed value for 2021. Oops, I went too far ahead there. Sorry about that. So now I'm going to talk about capital projects. So capital projects have been rolled up or summarized into 6 categories in the general fund, and that's represented by each of the rows in the table here. So we've summarized them into general government, protective services, planning and economic development, public works, roads, storm and drainage, and parks. Annual capital expenditures range from about $503,000 per year to $7.8 million per year over the next 5 years. Many of the capital provisions included in the financial plan are grant dependent, meaning that we will be applying for a grant or have applied for a grant. And if we don't receive the grant funds, we'll have to look at other ways to progress those projects. We won't continue on with them. In 2022, the majority of capital expenditures are in the roads and storm drainage program and in the planning and economic development program. And I'll go over highlights of the 2022 projects in the next slide. So significant projects included in the 2022 capital budget include provisions for phase 2 of the commercial core revitalization, which is a grant dependent project. A grant application has been submitted for this project. We also will be doing culvert and road upgrades and replacements on Dickinson Road. There's also a provision for the multi-use path along Lantzville Road. We also in 2022 have a provision for the Winds Water Expansion Project, which is subject to grant approval. And if the grant is successful, it'll also be subject to approval of long-term borrowing. We also have water main replacements on Lantzville Road from Peterson to Huddleston Roads. In protective services, almost all of our SCBA gear replacement, which has or is about to expire, needs to be replaced. And there are a number of small equipment and tool replacements. And in the equipment and information technology area, we'll be replacing a dump truck. We've got the server room relocation at Municipal Hall, and a server will need replacing this coming year, and provision for evergreening of laptops. In terms of our outer year capital projects, placeholders included in the outer years of 2023 to 2026 include a provision for a public works and fire hall facility, asphalt overlays and road upgrades and replacements at Alds, Phantom, and Fermar Roads and Lorenzen Lane, culvert replacements at Dickinson Road and Alger Road. And then we have equipment and IT replacements at the end of useful life of those assets. We have several water main replacements, and the Clark Drive water expansion project is included in the outer years, which is also a grant dependent project. So in terms of the At the October 27th special council meeting on the budget, council passed resolutions for the financial plan to be prepared reflecting the budget pressures identified at the October 13th and October 27th meetings. In addition, council requested that the annual provision for remuneration to the mayor be adjusted and that be adjusted to $25,000 a year, and that a $5,000 contribution to a reserve fund for expanding the community water system be included in the budget. Both of those items have been added and are included in the 5-year financial plan bylaw that council will be considering this evening. In terms of next steps in the budget process, the budget information is posted at the district website, on the district website for public input. And this presentation is the last step in the public input process. Also, as mentioned earlier in the presentation, council has also been previously provided with detailed information and schedules on the operating and capital budgets. Any public input information that was received, I believe, was forwarded to public through, was forwarded to council through the office, through the municipal hall this afternoon. And the 2022 to 2026 5-year financial plan is included in today's agenda for consideration of first, second, and third readings. Should council consider first, second, and third readings this evening, the financial plan will be considered for adoption at the December 1st council meeting. So to close, the recommendation is that the District of Lantzville 2022 to 2026 Financial Plan Bylaw 289, 2021 be given first, second, and third readings. Thank you, Your Worship. And that concludes my presentation.
Great. Thank you very much for your presentation, Director Hare. Yeah, it was an excellent summary. Through to council, is there any specific questions for Director Hare regarding presentation? So I got Councillor Gusbrecht and then Councillor Proctor. Go ahead, Councillor Gusbrecht.
Thank you. Director Hare, on one of your first slides, operating budget, you talked about the 2022 tax impact from the COVID restart funds. I didn't quite understand what you were getting at on that. You talked about carry forward. I just, I don't know what it means.
So there were a number of, so when I was talking about the reserves, there was $312,000, $312,200 of reserve contributions, and they were funded from COVID restart grants. So COVID restart grants was a one-time funding source. So what we did is we funded an ongoing expenditure through a one-time funding source. So we did not increase property taxes to fund that expenditure. We still have to contribute, we still need to contribute that $312,200 to reserves, but we can't rely on the COVID restart funding. So we need a funding source, and our only funding source for that is property taxes. Same with the operating budget. We funded a number of items, such as a portion of the deputy director's salary budget and a couple of other items through COVID restart grants. So those are ongoing expenditures, and we used the COVID restart grant as a funding source in 2021. So now those expenditures will need to be funded from taxation or property taxes.
I think I understood that part. We had COVID money in 2021. We used it. We used it for ongoing expenses. We don't have any of that money in 2022. So that gap that we funded through COVID in 2021, we now have to fund through taxation in 2022. Is that the gist of it?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Proctor.
Thank you. Through you to Director Hare, my understanding is that we are adding $312,000 to our budget for asset management, but we still have a deficit of 424,000 that should be added to the budget to, for us to handle our asset management properly. Is that correct?
Through you, your worship, to Councillor Proctor, that is exactly correct.
So the 312,000 that we've added to the budget isn't even half of what we should be adding to the budget. Am I correct?
You're correct.
Thank you.
Okay, additional questions from council before we entertain the motion? Okay, here, seeing none.
Actually, can
yeah, go
I
ahead,
just
Director.
correct something or just clarify something?
Sure, go ahead, Director.
The 312,200 is actually not being added as a contribution to reserves in 2022. We have kept the 2022 contribution at the same level as 2021 because it would, if we were to increase it and try to close the gap more, it would have a larger impact on property taxation. So we are actually contributing the same amount to reserves in 2022 as we did in 2021. However, we're funding it through property taxes rather than as we funded it last year through the COVID restart grant.
So it's less than 312,000 that we're adding.
You'll need your microphone on, Councillor Proctor.
Does the green light mean it's on? I see a green light. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Yes.
Thank you. So the 312,000 isn't all going to asset management. Some of it is other things that we covered by COVID.
No,
Relief.
that 312,200 is all going to asset reserves. And it's the property tax impact that you're seeing in 2022. Because what we did is we actually, if I can go back to last year, I believe council had reduced the contributions to reserves initially to provide a tax break. And then the COVID restart funds became available. So they, instead of charging property taxes, which is in reality what you should be funding ongoing expenses from, a decision was made to fund the contribution to reserves from the COVID restart grants. So we're contributing, and now comes 2022, we have to increase our taxes if we want to keep that same level of contribution to reserves as 2021, because we funded it from grant money in 2021. Did that answer your question, Councillor Proctor?
Yes, it does. Thank you. We're still really short in asset management.
Okay,
And we
Councillor
are still
Proctor.
really short. Correct.
Just following up on that discussion, when we were advised by former Director Slater when she was here, Director of Finance, that we were $650,000 behind the ball on asset management. And that's not something that happened the year before or 2 years before. That's historically, we weren't keeping up, so to speak, on putting enough money in reserves for asset management. Assets wear out, depreciation, replacement. So, and I recall Mayor Swain pointing out, and I believe it was in the 2019 budget discussions, that we were behind the ball and that we're going to be looking at tax increases to catch up because we aren't doing our duty. We aren't being responsible if we simply say, well, we'll let it go to the future. The kids can pay for it. No, that's not our job here. So I wish we could catch up the whole 750,000, but we're putting in 312,000. Next year will be another decision, but it's our responsibility to keep up on this. Thank you.
Okay, so unless there's any further questions for Director Hare, I suggest council that we move to the next part of our agenda, which is the bylaw 289. So I'm hearing or seeing nothing. Go ahead, Councillor Gusselbrecht.
Thank you. That District of Lantzville 2022-2026 financial plan bylaw number 289, 2021 be given first, second, and third readings.
And seconded by Councillor Proctor. Discussion on the bylaws. So through to you, Councillor Gusselbrecht, and then through to Councillor Proctor.
Yes, thank you. I believe this has been a fulsome and transparent process. We've had good discussions here at the council table. Some amendments have been made, some amendments didn't go through, but it was a discussion between all of us here. I know from personally that, and I'm sure everybody here feels it, that you don't like tax increases. But in order to maintain the levels of service, in order to put money away for asset management, and in order to comply with our strategic priorities, which we decided on when we were first elected several years ago, this is requiring tax increases. Now, the good news is that there's a lot more millionaires in Lantzville than there were a month ago. And, that's just the nature of the market here. Crack the champagne. But the other good news is that instead of looking at whatever the percentage increase, we're looking at a $273 increase for an average house, an average a house whose assessed value is on the average. And we discussed this at a previous meeting that more than half of Lantzville is at that average or less. Of course, if you're a $2-3 million property with assessed value, you're going to be paying more. But in the light of things, I believe that the increase in dollar amount is moderate, and I will be voting in favor of this motion.
Okay, through to Councillor Proctor as the seconder.
I'll reserve my thoughts for now. Thank you.
And through to the rest of the council. Okay, Councillor Savage, go ahead.
This budget can best be summarized by having too many new expenses. If each $24,100 increase is a 1% tax increase, then this budget's $531,100,000 tax levy is a 22.04% tax increase. That means since this council term began, there's been a 72.5% compounded tax increase. The proposed spending increase is actually $703,100, but this was offset by $172,000 in extra income, mostly from the foothills and building inspection fees. So the spending increase is actually higher than reflected by the 22% tax increase. So this budget proposes 103,000 full-time second planner. So there'll now be 2 planners, 86,100 full-time public works position, and a 7,000 part-time person to cover the holidays and so on of the support staff person for bylaw building inspection. And this is in addition to the past 2 years of staffing increases, Deputy Director Corporate, Public Works Foreman, Deputy Director Finance, Bylaw Officer, Building Inspection, Bylaw Support Person, Contracted Building Inspector. Plus this year for 2022, there's a $39,300 increase in staff wages. And that gives a total of about $685,740. So in 2022, we're up to a total of about $685,740 increase in annual staffing costs in the first 3 years of our term. And that does not include staff wage increases for the past 3 years. And this does not include all the temporary labor funded by grant money, like a $60,000 PR person for 1 year, $30,000 planning assistant, tens of thousands for the economic development officer. So all these staff increase funds would more than cover the stated 424,000 annual shortfall in capital reserve funding. And as I've said, each year, we can either have staff increases or we can have big increases in capital reserve funding, but we can't have both. Our population hasn't increased much, so there's no reason for such a rapid increase in new staff and 22% more in new taxes for 2022. This should be done in a slow, gradual way, commensurate with the increase in population. And all the net tax income from new development will not cover this over $700,000 increase in annual staffing costs, which means residents get the density, but not the new development tax income. Also of note is the $55,000 in new tax income from the foothills. The foothills is proven to be an economic winning development. The lots are a half acre or bigger. The tax assessed values are so high, the taxes collected outpace the basic per house administration costs by a big margin. Hence, they produce a healthy net income for the community. On top of that, the community gets hundreds of acres of parkland. On the other hand, with the high density subdivisions, each unit will have a lower tax assessed value than most current houses in Lantzville, which means current residents will be paying more in taxes than will these high density units, in a sense, subsidizing them. The other thing of note is the income from building inspection fees is 128,000 year to date as of August 31st. And while this is very helpful for general revenue.
Yeah, Councillor Savage,
Yep.
you're at your 5
Yep.
minutes. Additional speakers on this, first time speakers on first, second, third readings. Okay, hearing seeing none, I will open up for second time speakers. Okay, go ahead, Councillor Savage.
Yes, I'll just finish off. I was just saying the other thing of note is the income from building inspection is 128,000. That was year to date as of August 31st. And while this is helpful for general revenue, it also adds to the cost of a house for home buyers, something that's, we want to keep as where we can. So now the other thing with the RDN portion of this, you have to understand that other communities, they handle a lot of the things that the RDN handles for us. So you have to look at some of our RDN expenses as normal municipal expenses, such as garbage collection. Another one is parks and recreation, and so on. So transit is another one. So you have to consider that. This is 22% tax increase for the Lantzville portion, but you have to understand residents will also be facing increases in the regional district, where Lantzville's portion of the regional district. So this will actually be more than a 22% increase when you add other things as well. So I think a 22% tax increase is unacceptable to me, as is a compounded tax increase of 72.5%. since the council term began. So with apologies, I won't be supporting this budget. Thank you.
Okay, additional speakers. Okay, go ahead, Council Proctor.
I agree. We have had fulsome discussions about the budget. We've gone through a transparent process. And I think that we have a reasonable budget. I think that anytime we increase taxes, it's difficult for people. I think that it is deceptive and actually bordering on inflammatory to refer to the tax increases in percentages rather than dollar amounts. Because when the average price house taxes are going to increase $274 a month, and as discussed in previous meetings, a year, sorry, $274 a year. And as we discussed in previous meetings, 2/3 of the households in Lantzville are worth less than the average assessed house. So most of us will be paying less than $274 a month a year. And that amounts to $25 a month increase in order to not even come halfway to meeting what we should be for our capital reserve funding, and nowhere near what we know that the staffing should be increased to. So I will be supporting this budget, and I think that we need to look at this in dollar amounts. It's a way more realistic way for us to approach this and to explain it to the public. I think that a $25 a month increase is reasonable, especially considering how much less our taxes are than any surrounding municipality or any municipality in BC, and the fact that we are so very far behind in capital reserve funding.
Okay, additional speakers. Okay, Councillor Wilson, go ahead.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey the last 3 going on 4 years, and going through these budget exercises. And by no means do I think anyone of us on council wants to see tax increases on residents. But I think a lot of the reason why, and I'll go into some of Councillor Savage's comments, I think we need to understand as a community that we haven't paid our way for years. And some of these tax increases are done so in an effort to put us in a healthier situation moving forward so that we don't have to have these tax increases. With respect to, in all respects to Councillor Savage's comments, I feel that his comments ignore our reports on the number of staff that we have and lack of staff, ignoring the fact that Lantzville has a lot of really old infrastructure. Yes, I understand that our population hasn't really increased for many years, but we're actually trying to have our public works staff deal with old infrastructure that is just breaking down. Also, it ignores the poor weather incidents that we've had over the last few years, and the need for public works staff to be cleaning up, doing more than they otherwise normally would have had to have been doing due to things like, maybe from climate change. Ignoring also the fact that we've just adopted and taken on a brand new park. Who's going to look after that? Ignoring the need for a new planner, we also have to keep in mind that with a new planner, I think that we're, of course, anticipating more development in Lantzville with the Clark Med subdivision, and that ultimately will bring revenue to the district. Also, ignoring how we compare to other municipalities of similar size in BC and what they pay for taxes, and also ignoring staff comparison numbers, as Councillor Proctor alluded to, when compared to other municipalities of similar size. So when you sit back and you look at it and you do a bunch of comparisons, I believe we're still going to be one of the lowest when it comes to number of staff and what staff are paid in the province when you compare us to other municipalities. So I will be supporting this motion. I don't like the increase, of course, but I think it's necessary to put Lantzville on the right track moving forward. And I would encourage residents to look at it from an increase in what the actual number is, as opposed to looking at it from a percentage increase. Thank you.
Okay, I'll speak next, and then if there's any additional speakers, then we'll start a new speakers list. For myself, I do look at it from a percentage standpoint, simply because I look at it from the big picture standpoint of, you know, how much we're actually increasing our municipal spending. And it gives me an idea of, you know, how much our overall budget is increasing. Similar to if I was planning my, you know, family budget for the year and so forth, you know, I would want to look at, you know, how much that's increasing relative to maybe my income. Now, the reality here, when we're dealing with municipal spending is, and we're looking for revenue sources, we just have really one tap to draw from, and that's basically the resident tap. And we can just go over there and crank it up and take what we think we need. I don't necessarily think that's, you know, the greatest thing to be doing, especially when we're looking at the overall municipal spending being or increases being as high as it has been. I know we've been looking at this in isolation to the other taxes that are collected here in Lantzville, and sure that our municipal portion might equate to 274, or if you have water, it might be the 304 as quoted in the presentation. But, you know, we still have to look at what we're paying for our RDN tax. We have to look at the library tax, and all those values go up in percentages as well. So when I look at library and you know, I think there was a recent publication the council received. I can't remember the exact percentage, but it was just under 4%. That's the increase from the library. And so I look at that and I'm like, okay, great. And then in that report, they indicated that, you know, they've tried to keep the levy down this year simply by not approving any large capital expenditures, which essentially means not building any new libraries, from my understanding. You know, you have to look at the RDN as well, and that's a little bit larger chunk of our tax bill, not necessarily as much as our municipal chunk, and definitely not as much as the school board chunk. But, you know, we have to look at all pieces as it comes together and what the overall impact on our residents' tax bills are going to be. And I know we're just responsible for the municipal portion, but when I see 21% or whatever increase in our overall expenditure, and then I don't know what the school district is going to be doing. They are on a bit of a different budget cycle, and we'll find out what the percent increase will be later on in 2022. But with respect to the police, I don't know what that's going to be doing. With the hospital district board, I don't know what that increase is going to be. That one could be a little bit higher, but we'll wait and see on that one. So there's still some missing pieces of the pie here that I'm looking at on, I guess it's our municipal property tax breakdown that was included in our budget binder. You know, in terms of how we're spending within the municipality, you know, with staffing increases, I can somewhat support that. I don't believe that we have to have, you know, the highest levels of service, and it's, you know, sometimes things have to slide. If you don't have the money coming in, maybe you don't provide the greatest level of service. I haven't been hearing any complaints about our levels of service. But in terms of just trying to keep this high level of service and increasing the tax burden on our residents, it just doesn't sit well. In terms of where we're spending and staffing, you know, I like to spend where there's going to be the greatest impact, in my opinion, and this is, I expressed this during our budget talks anyways, is in the public service or the public works end of things. In terms of closing that funding gap with respect to our asset management, I would have preferred to have seen some of the tax monies that we're spending on increased staffing to actually gone into our asset management. So we actually started making a bit more of a contribution starting this year rather than yet putting it off another year. But overall, this is council's budget. It is what it is, and there's not a whole lot we can do about it. But you know, things definitely, you know, and I said this in previous years, you know, we are behind and we have to make bold decisions. But when we make these bold decisions, trying to make them in my opinion, what would be the correct areas is very paramount. So that's all I have to say for now, but through the rest of the council. So Councillor Guspratt.
Well, First of all, I disagree with the mayor's comment that there's not much we can do about it. We are doing it. We're making decisions. We got elected to make decisions. We got elected to lead, and that's what we're doing. We're not just shrugging our shoulders, throwing up our hands saying, oh, can't do anything. No, we're doing it. And tonight's budget is part of that. There's a reason that we haven't gotten a lot of complaints about service, and that's because we've maintained a level of service. I wouldn't characterize it as high. I would characterize it as adequate. If you didn't have that level of service, yeah, there'd be a lot of complaints. They'd be lined up out the door here. I have to take exception to Councillor Savage's calculation of a 72.5% compounded increase in taxes since we've sat here on this council. I did a very simple calculation. I took my tax assessment for when I was elected the first term in 2015. I took that tax assessment and I took my tax assessment for this year and I subtracted the first one from the second one, and that increase was 14% over 6 years. That's 14%. Okay, that's the bad news. What's the good news? My house assessment from 2015 till a week ago, before we all became millionaires, my assessment increased 80%. So, you know, you have to take some of the bad with the good. The good is that, you know, something beyond our control, our house prices, our house assessments have risen exponentially here on the Mid-Island. And it's only going to get worse because housing is scarce. I do agree with Councillor Savage when he pointed out that the foothills is an economically winning addition. I agree. And those were half-acre lots. Can you imagine if we had had quarter-acre lots up there? That would have been twice as good. Well, we have approved at least one subdivision with quarter-acre. We have a new OCP that talks about housing and diversity and density in certain areas. So I think there's going to be some more economically winning additions to this community that will bring more hands to the pump, so to speak, to pay the cost of infrastructure, replacement, repair, keeping our level of service at an adequate level so that we keep a happy community here. Thank you.
Okay, additional speakers before I call the question. So go ahead, Councillor Savage.
Yes, just a couple of things, please. If citing the percent of a tax increase each year is deceptive and inflammatory, then all staff and councils, since we incorporated, are deceptive and inflammatory. It's happened every single year since incorporation. The percentage of tax increase is given. It's given in every municipality I've seen. And I was just in the Nanaimo papers what theirs is being proposed. So this is the first time in our incorporated history where we haven't been giving a tax increase. It's just like trying to get the density numbers of Village South. Numbers matter.
Okay, Councillor Savage, just
So-
stay on track with their budget, please.
So with the tax comparisons, as I say, you got to go into details. So for example, Princeton runs their own garbage, has sports fields, and other municipalities have their own pool. You got to dive deep to see exactly what the details are before you compare to any other municipalities. So, and if you are comparing, you have to add in our RDN costs, which other municipalities handle. So, And with house assessments going up, that's really not relevant because house assessments, this tax assessed value of homes going up, doesn't give residents cash. So it shouldn't matter whether they go up or not in terms of their ability to pay for these taxes. And with the 72.5% compounded tax increase, that's just simply taking the tax increase of every year, and then you have to realize each year thereafter, the tax increase the next year is a tax increase on the increase the previous year. So that works out to 72.5%. So anyway, thank you.
Okay. Again, I'm not going to get into too much back and forth here, but you know, it's in terms of the property tax increases. Again, they are what they are. There's not a whole lot we can do in terms of the municipality. We're faced with, as it's being characterized all the way through, pressures. We have pressures from multiple areas. We have pressures, you know, from the staffing front. We have pressures from the asset management front. We have pressures from the, you know, trying to make Lantzville, you know, a vibrant, livable place that's attractive and has lots of trails and so forth. So we you know, we have lots of pressures that are facing us, and we have to decide as a council, where are we going to put the money? And the source of money we have is essentially going to the residents and turning on that tap. And it's just, how much money are we going to take from residents? And again, the part that doesn't sit well with me is I just don't feel that we have necessarily, you know, all the information for the total impact, tax impact or burden that our residents are going to be facing. So, you know, here we are tonight. We have a budget in front of us that's we've gone through many times already, and we are at first, second, and third readings. So unless there's any further information, new information, I'm going to call the question. So Councillor Proctor.
Thank you. I think that it's really important for us to look at the numbers in our taxes realistically. If we raise our taxes in Lantzville 1%, the town gets less than $25,000. If the town of Nanaimo raises their taxes 1%, their coffers increase by almost $1 million. So percents are a very deceptive thing. I think, in fact, we used to call it creative accounting when I worked as an accounting clerk. I think that the actual amount of what our tax increase will be, the $25 a month, is a much more realistic way for us to look at it and to decide if we can afford that in order to keep the municipality running smoothly. We all voted for incorporation, and unfortunately, you can't be part pregnant and you can't be part incorporated. And, you know, we need to step up to the bat and pay for what it costs to run a municipality. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Wilson, and then I'm going to call the question.
One last thing, and I'll tie this into the budget. We in Lantzville, with this development application, have asked, our staff is hiring an independent consultant to do an economic analysis on this particular development.
So Councillor Wilson, I'm going to stop
with
you
the
there. Just simply,
lower.
Councillor Wilson, I don't believe you should be talking on
okay.
that application. So
Okay.
if you can maybe,
I'll tie it in.
another way, please.
I'll just say with applications that come forth, the economic impact will be influenced when your taxes are a little, if they're too low, you're going to need to have more density within a development to make it more of a viable development. So I think that that's been an issue in Lantzville for quite some time. Our taxes have been very, very low when comparing to other municipalities. And I think that there is some benefit to to this for Lantzville residents when we look at the big picture, when we look at moving down 10, 20, 30 years down the road, rather than kicking the can down the road as we've done for years up until now.
Right, through the council, I'm going to move to call in question then. All those in favor and opposed, and then Councillor Savage is opposed. Bylaw or first, second, and third readings carry. Moving on to bylaw number 294. Councillor Gusselbrecht.
A point of privilege, could we have a 5-minute break just before we go to the last item here?
If you need, sure.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Sorry, we're in recess for 5 minutes, so we'll reconvene at 7 o'clock. Okay, the time is 7 o'clock. So Councillor Wilson, I don't know if can hear me, if you can. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I'm calling this meeting back to order. Now we're on to bylaw number 294. Someone prepared to make the motion? I guess I can make my own motion here so that the district of Lantzville to council enumeration bylaw numbers 170/2018 amendment, open bracket, mayor remuneration, close bracket bylaw number 294, 2021 be given first, second, and third reading. I have a seconder to that, second by Councillor Savage. Discussion on the motion. It's pretty self-explanatory, so unless there's any further discussion, or any discussion, I will call the question. Okay, all those in favor and opposed? Okay, that's carried unanimously, and that takes us on to public clarification. So we have nobody in the gallery this evening, and we've completed our agenda, so I declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody.